My name is Amber Ham. I am the Training and Outreach Coordinator with Kentucky Spin, and we're so excited that you could join us today for our Lunch and Learn. Is your child struggling at school? Before we get into the material, we will need to go over a few housekeeping items, so bear with me as we do that. A little bit about Kentucky Spin, or Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA since 1988, when Kentucky first received a PTI. Kentucky Spin Parent Center provides training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through 26 years and beyond, their parents, families, as well as the professionals that assist them. At Kentucky Spin, we do not act as attorneys, we do not represent families, and we do not give legal advice. With that being said, we do empower families to effectively advocate for themselves, their family, and their children. We do this by utilizing a peer-to-peer model of support that helps families access needed information and resources. A brief disclosure about today's training. This is not a training of trainers, or TOT. Kentucky Spin does not authorize other agencies, organizations, or individuals to train this material. This presentation is for educational use only, and third-party recording and streaming is strictly prohibited. All rights for use are reserved by Kentucky Spin Incorporated. I do want to remind folks at Kentucky Spin, we are spread across the state and we are working from home. We ask for grace. You never know when an internet issue may arise. You might hear some dogs or delivery at the door, and we do apologize for those things. We do have staff here that can quickly up and assist when that need arises, as well as keeping an eye out for any questions that you may have in the chat. We will link closed caption, a link that you can utilize if that is something that is needed to get the live closed captioning throughout today's training. We will also present links in the chat that covers all material that we'll be going over today, as well as any resources we feel may be useful to you or the families that you assist. With that being said, we'll jump right in today. So, if your child is struggling at school, and this could mean many different things. So we do want to recognize that. It doesn't always mean that there is a disability. There could very well be a disability that could prevent truancy issues or um, being a little bit behind academically. There may be some behavioral issues or social emotional issues with peers. So, really kind of looking over options that families have if they see that their child is struggling. Maybe they don't want to attend school, or maybe when they're in school, they're feeling isolated and alone and not sure of how to complete assignments. Maybe feeling like they don't have peers around to support them. So, we do want to give information about all types of options that schools have in supporting families and students to be successful. So, what can we do if our child is struggling at school? We reach out to a teacher or a counselor and we ask what's available to help them at school and how do they access it? How do I access it? Are there also community resources that you can access along with school resources? Make sure to share concerns and needs that your student has and work in partnership with the school on solutions. One option right away in schools is our Kentucky multi-tiered system of supports, or also known as MTSS, previously referred to as RTI. And I do understand this is a lot of acronyms, and we do spell those out here, an explanation of what they mean, because it can become very overwhelming or confusing to parents and youth. So, what is Kentucky's MTSS program? It's defined as a multi-level of prevention of services to support a student in achieving achievement and social emotional behavior competencies through an integration of differentiated core instruction and, and assessments and interventions. So it's good to know that not every student may need an IEP or a 504. And that's something we will discuss further on throughout the webinar today. But there are supports that can be put into place to see if that student um, will respond or grow in their educational success through interventions. When we look at MTSS, we need to understand that it's not just based solely on a student that could be behind in reading or math. This student might have behavioral issues or social emotional issues that need supported through interventions. And when we look at the wheel here, that gives us a little bit more information in regards to the MTSS program. It shows that it's a collaborative problem solving with teams, data-based decision making with comprehensive screening and assessments, for family, school, and community partnerships. And it's evidence-based instruction, intervention, and supports. And as I previously said, this can look at academics, behavioral, as well as social emotional. And it is a tiered delivery system that is used for each student individually. And at this time, I am going to invite my colleague, Eileen Hoover, to talk a little bit about her experience with the MTSS program.
Hello, excuse me. My name's Eileen Hoover. I work for Kentucky Spin. I am the early childhood parent educator here. I have four children, three of which have different disabilities: autism, cerebral palsy, ADHD. You name it, we probably got the acronym. That being said, I've had four kids go through special education and have IEPs. And of my kids, two of them started with what was referred to then as RTI, or response to intervention. And it is now kind of morphed and turned into the MTSS system. And the way that when we went through it, it was about finding the supports and seeing whether or not my child or my children responded to the interventions that they were giving. So if my child needed speech and we give him speech support and his speech is improving, that's showing that that system is working for my child. And while my children had a multitude of other things that required them to get an IEP for specialized instruction, they first started with that middle tier of trying to find those interventions, trying to find support before having to go to an IEP or a 504. Because if my child uh, did not qualify for an IEP, didn't meet eligibility, that doesn't mean the child's need has gone away, but maybe we need to look at the MTSS system as a different way to give the supports needed um, for those types of children, like where we don't want to go from all the support to no support. We need to have that middle ground. And that was a great way to show, yep, my child responded to intervention, but they might have needed more supports than what was able to be given in that system. And then we were able to move on to the next one. So I think of it as that stepping stone to make sure that what we're doing or what the school is doing and what supports they're providing, that they're working. And then we can kind of assess, because there's a lot of kids, there's a lot of needs inside a school, and we want to make sure that we capture as many of those kids as possible so we don't have anybody fall behind. So,
Thank you, Eileen, for sharing that. And it is important also to know if you as a parent or guardian or a caregiver of this student has requested that evaluation process for special education services. If you're unaware, if that is needed, if that extra support is needed, um, it is important to know that a student can receive um, MTSS as well as being evaluated under special education services, that they can take place together. And not only can they should, if that request for an evaluation has been asked for, and you have met with the school and you feel that an evaluation is appropriate for your student. Sometimes parents or caregivers will hear, well, we need to make sure that the student goes through level 1, 2, or 3 of MTSS before we start that process. And um, in all actuality, they should co-occur if the request has been made, and as an ARC team, you have felt that an evaluation process is necessary for that student. And MTSS can be a wonderful assistance also to that process because it is data that can be brought to the table through evaluations as well to see what type of support that that individual student needs. So we did want to make sure and remind everyone that MTSS is something that is wonderful for students to receive all on its own. If you are a case or you have a student where you feel that special education services may be needed and you have that meeting with the school, they should co-occur at the same time. A student should not be held from a special education evaluation for services while they're receiving MTSS services. We also want families to, excuse me, to understand and know that families may not always take part, in every step of the MTSS process. With that being said, families and caregivers play a huge part in a student's education. So any information as a parent or caregiver that you're seeing that you can make sure to give to the school and let the school know about is only going to help assist in the student receiving the services or interventions that they need. You may see something completely different as a parent, just like a teacher or counselor may see something completely different educationally. So that partnership is huge when we're looking at the individual needs for each student. So does my child need a referral to special education services? When we look at our children's disability, we need to ask ourselves, does that affect them educationally? Examples are academically, socially, emotionally, behaviorally, and functionally. If you feel your child has a disability or has been diagnosed with a disability, or if you feel like your child is just having trouble learning in school, you may want to request an evaluation through the school for special education services. And to be clear, um, just because a student has a diagnosis, that does not automatically qualify them to receive an IEP in school. So, a common diagnosis out there is autism. I have a child with autism. Does that mean that his peer who also has autism, that they both would have an IEP or qualify? No, not necessarily. because we need to look at that individualized need of each student and each student's individualized diagnoses. So, really understanding that just because a student may have a medical diagnosis or a mental health diagnosis, that's not going to automatically qualify them. There is a process that has to go through or be taken through to see if this medical diagnosis or mental health diagnosis educationally affects the student and their progress. So, what is an evaluation? An evaluation gathers information about a child and how their disability affects them educationally. It looks at your child's strengths as well as weakness, and it also looks at what is difficult for them and how they perform functionally and academically in relationship to similar age peers. Information is gathered from parents, tests, observations, interviews, and medical information can also be considered. And I want to throw this out there too, because I have worked with a lot of families and my family myself with my child who has an IEP. Um, we receive a lot of information from doctors, and sometimes by the doctors trying to support us in supporting our children, they'll say, your child needs this, 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 and this at school, and they should receive, this, and they need this support. Um, and while that comes from a wonderful place of support in trying to help educate us parents, we also need to understand that when looking at special education services in the school, it's going to be, and I'm going to keep repeating this, how that disability affects their education. How is this disability and the need for certain supports educationally relevant to this student? And sometimes they may not get everything the way we feel that we may want our student to have, but it's tying the need that stems from that disability to the educational success and relevancy of our student. We always use visuals, and we're going to go into talking about 504 and IEPs. And we get asked all the time, which one is better? So it's a big, huge thing to know that not one plan is better than the next plan. It's always going to come down to that individualized need of the student. What do they need to be successful? Sometimes it's extra instruction or individualized instruction. Sometimes it's just access to the same instruction or program or extracurricular activity. So we use this visual here to explain the difference in Section 504 ADA, which is our federal law. That's the huge umbrella at the top, and we see it covers all of these students. Well, not just students, but individuals, right? So it's important to know that with 504 and ADA, that this is not educationally specific. And it's going to cover many disabilities diagnosis, mental health diagnosis will be covered for access to the same thing or same programs, same establishments that someone would have access to who doesn't have a disability or a diagnosis. When we look at the small umbrella here, where it states IDEA, that's state. This is going to be our IEP coverage and supports. Now, as you see, federal is going to cover state. But when we look at who qualifies for that support of an IEP, the umbrella is much smaller. They may need those folks that qualify under IDEA for an IEP may need that specially designed instruction or extra supports to be educationally successful. With that being said, the federal law also protects that student in their civil rights to gain access. So if a student qualifies under the small umbrella of IDEA, they're automatically covered by Section 504 and ADA. With Section 504, though, we go back to that is not educationally specific. That is access. IDEA is the extra supports through individualized learning and teaching through the IEP. We have our visual here, another visual that we give to parents. This is and caregivers as well as professionals. It's linked in today's PowerPoint. This is the easy reach to see the step-by-step process in uh, gaining an IEP if that's needed or steps needed to take. It also tells the difference of what an IEP is. So, an IEP is that written program developed by Admissions and Release Committee, or we often hear ARC. The ARC team will design to meet the student's unique educational needs. So, having this visual, printing it out, taking it with you, you can also see the steps needed. So referral, consent to eval, eligibility, the ARC IEP meeting, yearly meetings, and reevaluations. Does every child qualify if they have a disability? And we've already kind of discussed this in the beginning, that no, not every student has a need for an IEP in school. So that is a huge thing. A lot of folks don't realize that just because our student has a disability or has a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that that disability and or diagnosis is going to affect their success with their education. If your child does qualify under IDEA, then an individualized education program will be written with you as an equal IEP team member. Families, caregivers, parents are a huge role, as I've already stated, in their child's education. So knowing, understanding your rights as a caregiver or parent, um, in being a part of that is very significant because you're going to bring your expertise as a parent and caregiver to the table. Whereas you'll see a lot of things at home with your student that the school may not see and may not know that student needs. So being present, being part of that team is only going to help the outcome for your student and their success. Qualifying for special education services doesn't mean that he or she will go into a special education class by themselves. Rather, the law is written for every child to be in their least restrictive environment. So that would mean starting out every, excuse me, in the regular education classroom. Then, if it's not what it's appropriate for your child, looking at other settings. So, when we look at our least restrictive environment across the board, the standard would be the general education classroom. With that being said, we have to look at every individual student and their need. And some students, their least restrictive would be a more restrictive environment. That's how they will learn better. They will feel better and have more educational success. So it is not a one size fits all when it comes to least restrictive environment. It is truly the individualized need of that student. There are a number of categories for children that can qualify under an IEP in school, and the evaluation is at no cost to the parents. So, IDEA definition of disability must show an adverse effect on the student's progress in school, or it must be impeded by the student's disability to the extent that the educational performance is significantly and consistently below the level of same age peers. A medical diagnosis doesn't automatically qualify a child to receive special education services at the school level. An evaluation to determine eligibility must occur, and the student must meet criteria under one or more of the disability categories and must need specially designed instruction and related services. A referral. Anyone who has knowledge of the child and suspects that the child may have a disability can make a referral. So if it is a parent, a guardian, someone in the school who is working with the student, if they suspect that the student may have a disability, they may not have a diagnosed disability at this point. But if they suspect or they see signs of a disability, they can in fact refer the student for an eval. Parents have to sign consent before the evaluation can take place. It is so important to know that without that signature, nothing can move forward. And schools have 60 school days to complete that evaluation. That does not count spring break, summer break, weekends. Um, so 60 school days can be quite significant when we're looking at a student that potentially is, significantly behind same age non-disabled peers. So getting that consent signed right away after meeting with the school is going to be imperative as well to get that process started for your student. If we have any parents or caregivers on base where their students attend school on base, that's just a little bit different than students who are attending school in public schools outside of base. So for the DODEA schools, they have 45 school days from the date that you sign the parent permission or parent consent to assess form. We've spoken a little bit about eligibility categories, and we do have this here so that everyone can familiarize themselves with the categories under federal IDEA and then the KAR categories. So as we see, there's autism, deaf blindness, developmental delay. That will be ages 3 through 9. So you'll hear a lot of folks right around that third grade level. They no longer use the developmental delay. It will switch to a necessary category if the student is reevaluated and they still need an IEP or IEP services. Emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, including deafness, intellectual disability. The student might have multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disabilities, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment, including blindness. So how do we request a referral? We do that in writing. You can call and you can speak to the school in person. With that being said, there's really no paperwork or data for you to look back on or for the school to look back on. We always encourage parents that it be done in writing. It's not only for records and good record keeping, but this is a safety net for you as a parent as well as for the school. Just so that we can go back and we can look at dates, we can see when these letters were sent. We do provide an example letter for parents and caregivers as well as professionals in this PowerPoint. And you can just fill in your own information, but making sure that it is in writing, even if you've spoken to your school and they're in agreement and say, yes, we do feel like we need to get together and we need to evaluate the student. Follow that up with an email. because those dates are so important. And like I said, once the parent has given permission for the assessments to begin or evaluations to begin, that's 60 school days. So if we're not documenting things and going by dates, then things can be forgotten about or as if they've never happened. And then that's even longer before the student could potentially receive what they need. Effective written communication when you do go into your requests or conversations about your student with the school. Um, Write your letters to make a request, clarify an event, or decline a request, express appreciation, and document. And also know that we don't just communicate when things are hard or tough or we're frustrated, right? We want to make sure that we're effectively communicating because we are a partner with the school on all aspects of our student. So ensuring when things are good or when you hear something good, send some communication in with them too. This is all part of documentation to help your child be successful in school. And that's also going to help build a stronger relationship with the school if we're not just communicating when we're angry, mad. Um, First, we want to make a lasting impression. So answer the following. Why am I writing this letter? What do I want my letter to accomplish? Two, your first letter is a draft. So state your concerns, think over what you've written, make changes, have someone else read over the letter and make suggestions. Always read your letter out loud before sending it and giving yourself a grace period too. So once you have, started the process of writing the letter, instead of quickly sending the email, give yourself a few moments because you may have added something in the request or the communication um, that was you 5 minutes ago. And after you've had a moment to really think on words that are used, um, maybe you want to change that up so you're not sounding accusatory, and maybe you want to come back in and change your wording to sound more as a partnership or showing your concerns without showing your emotional anger um, or frustration. Keep things fact based and make sure they're clear and concise at what you're wanting to take place. Write letters that are clear and easy to understand. Write the letter as a business letter. Make it short and request a response. Something that parents ask us all the time is it rude for us to request that the teacher or administration respond back to an email instead of a phone call? It's absolutely not rude. If that is the need that you have and it makes things easier for you for documentation's sake so that you can go back later and reread, just simply asking in a clear, defined manner that they do reply in email. You don't have to explain yourself as to why, but it is not rude by saying, I would prefer that you respond back to this email within 10 business days or 5 business days because you're unable to answer the phone or speak on the phone, and make corrections. For children who do not qualify under IDEA for an IEP, they can potentially qualify under Section 504, and a 504 plan will be written. A 504 plan addresses unique learning needs of students with disability and provides reasonable accommodations so that the student has equal access to school programs and activities to meet their learning needs. Now, that is something that I had previously stated when we were looking at those large umbrellas earlier, and you're going to hear equal access when speaking of Section 504 or 504 plans. because the student isn't receiving that individualized um, education and teaching for specially designed instructions. That's not the purpose of a 504. A 504 is put in place for a student to receive reasonable accommodations that gives them equal access to the same material that their same age non-disabled peers have. That could be for extracurricular activities. It could be, in my daughter's case, she has a 504. She has a severe anaphylactic peanut allergy. And her 504 is written, and she receives accommodations for a peanut-free classroom. That gives her equal access to be able to be taught the material and gain her education, same as all of her same age non-disabled peers. So her reasonable accommodation would be a nut-free environment. Or maybe her seat and table get wiped down before she sits there. Those are gaining access to the same thing that everybody else gets. So she's not getting that specially designed instruction, but she's getting what she needs in order to remain in the classroom and receive her free appropriate public education. We also have a printable visual for Section 504, and it also goes over the definition of disability under 504 to qualify. So that is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a one major life activity, has a record of such an impairment, is regarded as having such an impairment. We list several different items that could be related to a major life activity. Um, that's why that umbrella is so large, because so many things qualify under Section 504. And then also the process to gain a 504, very similar really to special education services. A referral can be made, consents to evaluate eligibility. Does this student need a 504? Having a 504 meeting, a yearly meeting, and then reevaluations. So the process to both are very similar, but the outcome is different. Um, and that's always really good to know when we're looking at the individualized need of the student. So a 504 plan is not better than an IEP plan or vice versa. It's really, what does my student need to be successful in the education setting? Does your child's behavior impede their learning or that of others? There are functional behavioral assessments, FBA. The FBA is a structured data gathering process an IEP team uses to help identify positive behavior interventions and supports to be used in schools. An FBA is used to determine the answer to the following questions. Why does this student have challenging behavior? What reinforces the challenging behavior? And what positive interventions help decrease the challenging behavior and increase the desired behavior? And it's important to note too that a functional behavioral assessment isn't just for students with IEPs or a student with a 504. It can be for any student that has behavioral issues, that may need to address a certain behavior. And I'd like to call in my colleague again, Eileen, if she is okay to hop on. She is very passionate about functional behavioral assessments and behavioral intervention plans. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like for you to share some. Um, Take it away.
Yeah. No, I have four kids. All three of my boys are on the autism spectrum, and one of them has especially challenging behaviors. And one of the things that I personally stand for is that behavior is communication. It's not the communication that I would prefer. It's not the communication that I would like him to use. Sometimes that communication or that behavior is physical. Um, but when I go to a meeting, I look at all the adults in the room and I say, he is not communicating the way that we or society need him to communicate yet. And so what an FBA does is, you gather the information about whatever the behaviors are or the concerns are. And it shows that there's going to be, what is happening? Why is this behavior happening? What is happening before the behavior? What is the antecedents as to why this behavior is happening? What is the goal of the behavior? Is it that my child is trying to get out of doing an unpreferred activity, like he hates writing, so he doesn't want to write, and the next thing you know, there goes a chair because they're trying to make him write. And so from the FBA, you would turn all that information, all that data collection, normally from teacher observations and parental observations. Sometimes behavioral therapists will come in and give independent observations along with different surveys or testing to see, what do you see inside of the classroom? What do we see at home? And from there, once you gather all of that data to get a really good snapshot or present level, what this child looks like in school, then we can move to making something called a BIT or behavioral intervention plan. And that plan is set up to say, if this behavior occurs, then we are going to have steps A, B, C, and D to do. But even before that behavior occurs, we know my child has difficulty doing whatever it is, X, Y, or Z. So we're also going to put in place different items that are going to prevent the behavior, to help them gain coping skills and gain the communication that we as society, as adults, are trying to teach him. But it may be something that they're just not there yet. And we're trying to meet them wherever they are on their level so we can teach those coping skills. So that behavior is not the only way that my child feels as though they can communicate or that they have any way to get somebody to listen to what they're saying. I've got I think I've got a 3-page bit right here for one of my kids. And one of the nice things about it is that it's all based on data. It's not based on anecdotal evidence or evidence that, well, mom says they're doing something in school. This is where I'm not necessarily saying that, although I am. The school is recognizing that there are behaviors and that there's things that are preventing my child from accessing education like other kids who are not disabled. So it's not about, and Amber kind of said, like, it's not about having the best or the most. We're just trying to make sure that my child, while they don't have amazing coping skills and they are still struggling with appropriate communication, even though they should know what they're doing, we are now working on giving that child those skills so they can access education similar to how other kids are able to stay inside of the classroom and not have to go to the principal's office or not have to take time out of their day, because that's all educational minutes. And while academically it may not be something that is directly related to academics, like it's not reading scores, it's not math scores, but it does have to do with academics. Because if my kid can't access that education, that's where we need to step in. So I probably went off too much. So
No, you did great, and thank you. I always appreciate when you come in and share some of those experiences. And it is also important to note that the functional behavioral assessment is a tool. There was guidance that was sent down, and a lot of teachers are using that functional behavioral assessment in a toolkit for all students. So this isn't just for students who have a disability, a diagnosed disability or perceived disability. This is something that could work for all students in a classroom setting or anywhere educationally. And a lot of teachers are using that to help with success in the classroom all the way across the board. So if you have a student who doesn't have a diagnosed disability, this is something that may be beneficial if the student has some behavioral issues. And I do want to jump back just for a moment because I get so carried away about some of the things, and I may have misspoken earlier, but I want to clarify. Um, so when we were looking at 504 and IEPs, so under IDEA, it is a federal law. And when I say like the IEP, that would be governed by like the state regulations. So that is the difference. And I don't want to confuse anyone. So I wanted to make sure to come back to that and say, that IDEA is federal law as well. And they're both federal and state regulations for IEPs. So I just want to clarify so that doesn't further confuse anyone. Um, but yes, we can jump forward, and we also provide another provide another visual. This one for what Eileen was just sharing about, the FBA and the BIP. You can print this. We do offer live links in the presentation material for you to print this out and have with you. And it goes over what the purpose of a functional behavior assessment is, what it does, why are we using this? So identifying and defining, collecting data, analyzing the combined data and evaluation trends, and then developing the behavioral intervention plan if that is what is needed. And as I've stated earlier, a behavioral intervention plan is not just specific to a student who has an IEP or a 504. Some students may not have an IEP or a 504 and need a functional behavioral assessment done and a BIP created. So it's always good to have this to see if this is an extra support or an additional support that your student may need to be successful in school. So in conclusion today, if you suspect your child has a disability that impacts their education, it is your right to request an evaluation. Evaluations should be requested in writing. Requesting that a response within 10 school days, request and sign the parental consents to evaluate as soon as possible because that's 60 school days, or if you were on base, that 45 school days can be a long time. Keep all correspondence in an easily accessible location. And as I've previously stated, this isn't for parents and caregivers to keep everything so they just have proof to go against a school. This is a safety net for all involved, for everyone to be able to go back and read correspondence on both sides, the school as well as the parents and the youth. What have we tried? What could we try in the future that would be helpful for this student? What were the dates that things were requested? When did initial evaluations take place? What evaluation categories was the student evaluated in? That's something that is also extremely important to know. Your student may have an evaluation for one disability category. They may not qualify under that category. They may need to be evaluated in a completely different category to receive special education services if that need is there. So creating an IEP binder or a records binder with your student is so good to be able to go back and look at past experiences and communications to help in the future, and also provide that documentation to the school if they don't have that documentation. And then, of course, you're always welcome to contact Kentucky Spin. And we are so glad to be here to assist you on your journey, as we all are either parents and caregivers of individuals with disabilities, and or individuals with disabilities ourselves. So we truly get it. And I see Eileen popping on. I didn't know if she wanted to add to that.
Well, I was just looking and it looks like we have a question. And so it says, if you have an FBA done with a behavioral plan is in place, the school question, I guess, why the behaviors are still happening and what can parents do? And I don't mind answering that.
Sure, go right
So
ahead.
if you have an FBA in place, FBA is just kind of the word that they use to talk about that test to see what behaviors are happening, what happens before, what happens after. The BIP or the behavioral intervention plan is the plan in place meant to prevent behaviors before they start. So if you have a BIP in place or a behavioral intervention plan in place, and your child is still having behaviors that they are getting in trouble, maybe they're being sent to the principal's office, they're being suspended, whatever sort of detention sort of thing that they're doing, whatever they're doing, that is data that is being collected to show why this is or is not working. You, as a parent, caregiver, whoever, have the ability to request an ARC meeting or the admissions release committee meeting. We call it the IEP meeting sometimes, and say, hey, we have a BIP in place, but I'm noticing I'm getting referrals, they're being suspended. That's data to show that what they have in place is not working. And one of the things I love most about the public school system is that we don't get to say, well, we sure did try. You're right. We did try. And now that we know plans A, B, and C don't work, I have the rest of the alphabet to come up with new plans because kids change. So my kid just went from elementary school to the sixth grade middle school. There was huge change in behaviors and expectations, and that happens every year. So this should be something that if you have a BIP, you should be probably coming back to it at least once a year, at least during, if they have an IEP, the annual ARC meeting that you have to review that. So if you have a BIP in place and it is not working, I always say, oh, thank goodness we know we've tried this. Now we get to try something new. Now we get to come up with the next plan. And how do we know we need that next plan? I am not saying it. The school is recognizing it. The school has the data to show they're being suspended, they're getting in trouble, they have detention, they're still having whatever it is that's causing that behavior to be disruptive to that child's education. And now we come up with a new plan. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Eileen. We did pack this material completely full of helpful resources, that we just want to make sure that we get in the hands of families and professionals that assist families. So we did provide 2 pages here of all special education related material, as well as information that we have covered throughout the training, questions and answers on specific regulations and related to IDEA, just for parents learning about special education, the rights to obtain an independent education evaluation, are just to list a few, as well as 504 plan infographic, 504 plan for public schools, partners in advocacy, guide to special education planning, special education glossary of terms. And we have provided so much material in the chat for today. If you have been unable to grab those links as the webinar has went on, no fear. We will be sending these links out to you in a follow-up email that you'll receive within 24 hours. We do ask that you take just a moment and complete our evaluation form for today. Once the evaluation has been completed, you'll receive a certificate of attendance for being with us today. But the most important part is we want to hear from our folks across Kentucky. Um, it means absolutely everything to us. We want to make sure that we're sharing information that's meaningful to you. What is it that you'd like to hear more of? What would you like us to elaborate on? Maybe it's something that's completely different that we haven't discussed yet. Please fill that out and let us know. Your voice matters, and we want to make sure that we're providing information to you that's needed. As we've stated, we are always here if you need assistance. We can be reached by phone or email, as well as on our social media, Facebook and Instagram. And we post all of our webinar videos to YouTube. And then you can also sign up for our e-news, which will tell you all of the wonderful resources and opportunities that we put out as soon as we drop those and release those to the public. And I'm going to stop for just a moment to see if we have any questions. And I do not see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So once again, thank you so much for being with us today. We really value each and every one of you, and we hope to see you at upcoming events.